Canada is throwing its doors open to dozens of humanitarian volunteers rescued in a daring and unprecedented operation in Syria overnight. It's among several countries that provided significant logistical support to the top-secret mission, a mission that has seen hundreds of white helmet humanitarian volunteers and their families being given refuge right now in Jordan. The Israeli military actually carried out the rescue, and this video, shot by the German newspaper Bild, claims to show the vehicles carrying out the evacuation. The extraction was apparently in the works for several days and prompted by fears that the white helmets had become targets of the Assad regime. The evacuees began their journey in a rebel-held region of southern Syria and then taken across the Golan Heights. They are now in an undisclosed location in Jordan. The Israeli Defense Forces have released a few set of details about the rescue, but in their latest tweet, they reveal that the evacuees are, quote, now out of harm's way, that the convoy did in fact travel through Israel, and that the life-saving mission, as the IDF describes it, was carried out at the request of the U.S., Canada, and the European Union. CBC's Murray Brewster takes us through that international effort and the politics of the mission, and Ottawa's decision to resettle dozens of white helmets and their families in Canada.
The white helmets and their families were spirited out of Syria on Saturday. It was a highly secret international operation that involved Britain, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Canada. That's according to several senior sources who spoke with CBC News. Canada was not involved militarily in the evacuation, but has helped lead the effort to get Syrians into Jordan. Canadian officials are expected to immediately begin working with the United Nations. It's going to process the families that will eventually make their way to Canada in the coming weeks. The Liberal government has agreed to accept up to 50 of the White Helmet volunteers and their families. That could total up to 250 people. The plight of the White Helmets was the subject of intense debate among foreign ministers at a recent NATO conference. That's according to several high-placed sources. The United States will not take any of the White Helmet volunteers whose rescue efforts have drawn international praise and condemnation. At one point, they were thought to be a shoo-in for the Nobel Peace Prize. Russia and the Syrian regime, however, have labeled them as terrorists and purveyors of fake news for their reporting on civilian atrocities. There are fears the White Helmets could be killed once forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad retake the region. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
You heard Murray talk about Canada's willingness to take in white helmets and their families. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland issued a statement overnight, and it says, in part, Canada has been unequivocal about its support for the white helmets and is proud to have provided funding to support their emergency training. We feel a deep moral responsibility towards these brave and selfless people. Our Dominic Velitis is also tracking the story out of London. Dominic, walk us through the rescue efforts.
Well, Natasha, this was a highly significant rescue operation. Overnight, the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, evacuated those hundreds of people belonging to the so-called White Helmets to Jordan via the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Now, the White Helmets had been working in Quneitra. It's an area in the southwest of Syria, but they'd become trapped and surrounded by a government offensive. And there were very real fears, Natasha, that the volunteers, who've been backed by the United States and its allies for several years now, would be targeted by Syrian forces as they retook that territory, as they retook control. Many loyal to the Assad regime believe that the White Helmets actually support rebel forces and also claim they some have links to jihadist groups on the ground there. Now, the IDF described last night's operation as an exceptional humanitarian gesture and one carried out at the request of the US and other European nations. Indeed, it's believed, Natasha, that the evacuation plans themselves were actually accelerated after last week's NATO summit in Brussels. Natasha.
Dominic, we're also learning that the Israeli military actually led this rescue operation, and many are wondering why they're stepping up now.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, officially, Israel takes a neutral stance in the Syrian conflict. For the better part, Israel has pursued a non-intervention policy in Syria. That said, it looks like the Israelis were the only ones, realistically anyway, who could get the white helmets out of the country. As I mentioned, the volunteer group was in Quneitra in the southwest of Syria. It is the last slither of land still outside government control. It is close to the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, and since the Syrian government offensive began in June, that area generally has become one of the safest, if not the safest, in the southwestern region. Indeed, it's attracted hundreds, if not thousands, of internally displaced people because it is along the disengagement line with Israel, which was demarcated in 1974 after the war. And for that reason, Natasha, Syrian government forces are unlikely to fire there or carry out airstrikes or any kind of military operations for fear of an Israeli response.
The white helmets remain a topic of controversy in some circles, and you might be wondering why that is. Well, let's get into that with Megan Roberts, who's following that part of the story for us. Megan, remind us, who are the White Helmets?
They're a volunteer group, Natasha, made up of normal Syrians who in their normal lives would be doing jobs like construction worker, pharmacist, or gym teacher. They started in 2013, and we know them as the White Helmets, but they're officially called the Syria Civil Defense. In terms of how many volunteers are a part of this, according to the Syria Civil Defense, they have 3,922. And again, according to the Syria Civil Defense, or the White Helmets as we know them, they have saved more than 100,000 lives. They do that with their search and rescue efforts. They go into areas that have been bombed, they go through the rubble, and they say that they try to save people there. And you can see exactly what they're doing in this video footage. They act as emergency responders, they act as firefighters sometimes. It's obviously a dangerous job to go into any area that has just been bombed, and they say 204 of their volunteers have died. They also say that they are unarmed and that they are neutral. They have no political affiliations and they will help anyone who needs it. And they also say they, in addition to firefighting and pulling people from the rubble, they perform public services, they repair buildings, they reconnect electric cables, and they also, as we see here, clearly document what's going on the ground. And some of this documentation has been used by organizations to corroborate witness testimony of what went on in this, is continuing to go on in the Syrian civil war, Natasha.
And the White Helmets have received praise for their efforts, but they've also received criticism. Tell us about that, Megan.
Well, we know that they got a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. There was a documentary made about them that won an Academy Award. So certainly some of the international community views them as heroes. Others, as we mentioned, the Russian government does not. They view them as having ties to jihadist groups, as does the Syrian regime. So it depends on who you ask, though it is worth noting that the Russian government and Syrian regime have not provided any concrete proof that this group has ties to jihadist groups.
Ibrahim Olabi is the director of the Syrian Legal Development Program, which has trained members of the White Helmets in matters dealing with international law. And he says members of the group were facing real danger.
It's only logical, and also giving different precedents that happened in Aleppo and in Ghouta. When the Syrian government gained more control, anyone from the White Helmets who stayed behind was tortured, was detained. They were forced to make videos confessing of them being aligned with al-Qaeda or other groups, and therefore had no other option other than to leave Syria when the regime started regaining control in the south of the country.
So, Ibrahim, are you able to tell us, forgive me, but are you able to tell us about how last night's operation unfolded? Who went in? How long did this take? How many people were involved?
Well, the details itself was not yet made public. There were reports of this happening from 9 p.m. last night to 5 a.m. local time. And it happened through the Golan Heights, which was the only available route that the White Helmets could take. ISIS creeping in from the south and the regime and the Iranian and Russian militias creeping in from the north. And so the only option that they had left was to coordinate through their donors, through the US, the United Kingdom, Canada, of course, played a major role in this, and Germany, to try and liaise with both Israel and Jordan to get them out safely.
What do we know about the Israeli efforts within that rescue operation?
Well, what we know is that the countries that are funding and supporting the White Helmets coordinated with Israel to get the White Helmets out of the through the occupied Golan Heights. What we also know is that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, tweeted earlier saying that they've done a good job in rescuing people. What we do fear is this matter could become politicized and each party trying to kind of shed light on the good efforts that they are doing in order to kind of shift the limelight from other issues or other concerns that are being raised, particularly in Gaza. But what we know is that Israel played a role in evacuating these people from the south of Syria into Jordan, a trip which took a couple of hours, as I understand.
Okay, we understand the Israelis led the rescue operation. You also mentioned Canada's role in this. What do you know of that?
Well, what we know is there was incredible cooperation between all the countries, including Canada. When I spoke to members of the White Helmets about this evacuation, they said it was not a negotiation. All countries worked together in order to get them out, and Canada played a significant role in that, which they're very thankful for. And also, Canada will play a role in the resettlement process, which is stage 2 of this evacuation. These members would get to Jordan. Jordan said that it received guarantees from countries which included Canada for these people to be interviewed over a period of 3 months and then get resettled into Canada.
Ibrahim, you mentioned the issue of this rescue operation getting politicized. We know that from time to time the White Helmets are criticized and accused of being in bed with Islamist groups, that they're supportive of Islamist groups. These arguments continuously go on. What do you say to those allegations?
Well, the reason these allegations exist is that because the White Helmets have done an incredible job documenting the crimes, particularly of the Syrian regime and Russia. And therefore, these two countries have put all what they've got in terms of propaganda and their propaganda machine to try and defame and discredit the White Helmets. Yes, mistakes have been made. This is an organization of 3,000 volunteers. But the question is, do they have codes of conduct in place? They do. Did they hold people accountable that went out of the line of their impartiality and neutrality? They did. We, as an organization, kept training the White Helmets on how to kind of conduct themselves. We helped draft the code of conduct. So I've seen these documents. This is an organization that is trying its best to remain principled in accordance with the humanitarian principles of impartiality and neutrality.